We've got a great agenda today. I'd like to introduce, if I could, uh, Mr. Simonetti. I'm good, right?
You got it right that time. Yep.
Now, see, you didn't have to tell him that I got it right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Perfect. First shot. You got it right.
No, I'm only kidding. We had an excellent session this morning, is what Luke was referring to, because we did. He is a 2007 graduate of the College of Information Sciences and Technology at Penn State University. I think that should sound familiar to some of you. And he currently works at Gartner Inc., where he leads a global security and risk management consulting practice. And he literally was consulting with someone 4 minutes ago. Had a customer on the line and joined us so he could spare his 50 minutes with you, precious 50 minutes, but he likes it, he enjoys it, and he's been in your shoes. And that's the important takeaway to my introduction. He is an experienced security expert and works with organizations ranging from Fortune 100 to federal, state, and local governments. He and his team regularly apply deep levels, and here's the takeaway, of knowledge in security governance, threat intelligence and modeling, network and application security, business IT integration, security operations process and improvement and risk management. And another key takeaway, in 2006, just before his start of his last year at Penn State, he was an intern with Price Waterhouse. That turned into a full-time position, and that was his first job. And one of the things he talked about is that internship was, I think you called it a long interview, a 2-month interview.
Yep.
He'll get into that. So at Price Waterhouse, he worked all the way through, leaving as a senior member or experienced member, and then moved on to Booz Allen Hamilton. And Booz, I've worked with Booz for many years. It's an excellent company, and Luke started as a senior consultant and left as an associate manager. Moved all the way through the process there with Booz Allen, and now he's with a consulting firm. Information security professional for 15 years, experienced assessing and building information security programs. Right up our alley here with Security and Risk Analysis 111. So with that, I'll turn it over to Luke. Thanks.
All righty. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining. I see we keep adding a few more participants here, so lovely to have you all. And definitely a great introduction, and I'll get into some more detail, as you saw from the title track, and as I understand, I'm the last speaker of this. We'll close it out strong. I wanted to give you a little bit of my journey from IST through kind of where I am now, and just talk about some of those along the way. I regularly interact with customers, clients, with all the way up to executive CEOs, boards, federal and state and local officials and elected officials as well, and really help them from a cybersecurity standpoint. All the while, of course, running a consulting business, which is a fun time. So as we go through, I certainly, as you'll get to know as we go through this conversation, I do like to talk a lot. But what I would challenge you to do, because I don't want to just be a talking head in this case, is actually ask me questions. So there's a Q&A function built into Zoom. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, given the we'll say the new normal that we had, or the fun that we had during COVID, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit here as well. So please feel free to use the Q&A. I will try to answer questions as we go through if specific things pop up, or feel free to enter them into the chat. I can look at it that way too. I have them both up, and if you see me look over here, it's because my other screen is right here. So I am actually trying to keep tabs on that as we go through. But I guess first and foremost, I just wanted to thank the team for giving me the opportunity to come in and speak today. as you'll hear, I really do enjoy this, and it is fun giving back to the university, especially since I actually do live here in Happy Valley again, not too far away from Dean Sears, in fact. So it is a good time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. And I wanted to start at the beginning. And I, quite frankly, I wanted to start a little bit before the beginning as well. Before the beginning of my career, and that by that, and mean that when I actually came to Penn State, I grew up not far away from here, just down past the reservoir on 322. If you've for many of those of you that travel in here, so Penn State was always the choice. But what I actually came in to do, what I thought I wanted to do, was aerospace engineering. Got into the major, no problem, and then going through classes are great. And then we had the fun math classes. And for any of you out there that have had to do differential equations, basically calculus on trigonometric functions, was never fun for me. And knowing that I had about 4 or 5 more math classes like that were not going to be fun at all, I decided, hey, maybe aerospace isn't the thing for me anymore, and started to look around. Obviously, when I came to school, technology was really starting to pick up the pace. There I started here in 2003, and IST seemed to be, the up and coming school at the time of choice, not a college quite yet, and it created the perfect blend of both deep from a technology standpoint and that linkage to the business, which is perfect for me. Perfect for I'll say my personality and what I thought I wanted to do at the time. Didn't want to quite go all the way down from a computer science or engineering standpoint, but this seemed to be a great balance as well. So, I was hooked after that, if you will. I got into IST, and it was really interesting, to me. And one, I guess, fun fact, if you didn't know at the time, or I'm sure the college has probably told you at some point, the only degree I could get at the time was an IST degree. Now I had 3 options. It was integration, development, or something else. I forget at the time, but I went with integration. We didn't have cybersecurity. We didn't have data science. We didn't have SRA at the time. But IST gave you a good balance, taught you quite a bit of the fundamentals, and that was great for me. And I really truly found a passion for what we were doing in the classes, and there was through some of the great professors that I had going through, and just even some of the content of the classes. It was just extremely interesting to me, and quite frankly, the concept, which again was relatively new to me at the time, of lifelong learning, basically you're never done, really stuck with me. And the fact that it was ingrained has been ingrained into me, has quite frankly led to the success I've had, and really just being able to stay current, stay up to date, and really understand where and why the security, the cybersecurity world is changing, helping to influence that, and so forth, and really factor that into the way that we do our analysis here at Gartner. One, I'll say, fun side note that I love to throw in here, and when I'm kind of doing talks around my career a little bit, is actually when I was at PSU, I did a little more than just go to classes. I was actually one of the varsity cheerleaders at Penn State. Some of you are probably smiling a little bit at that, but I was quite honestly a little short to play football at the Division I level, and got talked into going to cheerleading tryouts, and did that for 3 years. So it was a great time. And the reason I bring that up, because it's really interesting, is it was fun, had a lot of great time, got to travel with the teams, go to a lot of great places, got some of the perks like being on the field when we were actually allowed in the stadium at the time, and so forth. But where it's related to this is we actually had to do a lot of events outside of just the sporting events, where we had to, for lack of a better term, mingle with donors, with key university officials, and quite a lot of other folks, even people just there to enjoy the game. We did that at pep rallies. We did that at like President's Breakfast before football games, and just a whole plethora of those. And what that honestly forced me to do, because we were expected to mingle, was really work on, I'll say, the soft skills. How do you actually create connections with people? And quite frankly, a lot of what we do in the security world is around helping people to understand and make a decision about risk, and just being able to be articulate with some of these folks that that we had to interact with was great. So it wasn't just hey, what are you going to school for? What year are you graduating? Do you like it here? You could actually have a real conversation with folks, or you were kind of forced to actually not feel like you were having a drag there as well. So it's really an interesting part, and I thought it was just great in terms of being able to build that part of a skill set and also be building the technical skill set. They just naturally fit together from an IST standpoint. What's additionally interesting as a part of that, and really the corollary to what I do from a, call it, a day-to-day standpoint, is that Bill mentioned when we started, well, right before we started, I was on with a client of mine. He called me out of the blue to talk about an issue they're having, before I said, hey, I have to go to talk to you all here. But the best part, at least the most fun part of the job that I have now, is honestly taking these complex cybersecurity topics and translating them into, we'll call it executive level communications to executives, boards. And I saw a question come in, and I'll touch on that here in just a minute. Other federal, state, and local officials, like I said. And, while it may sound simple on its face, it's actually really tough and difficult when you think about condensing the thousands of data points that I and my team do, and go through all these analyses into, say, the 5 minutes you have in front of a board. It's so funny. My team and I will spend weeks or months doing work with a company, and they'll ask us to present in front of the board, which honestly, I have a board presentation coming up in about 2 weeks, and I have 20 minutes to explain it to them, and explain what we found, what it means, why they need to make changes. That translation takes a lot of time to get good at, and it takes practice to be good in front of an executive audience. And I think, here's where what's that old adage about it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert at something? This is one of those things where it takes a lot of practice. Some people are naturally good at it. Other ones, it takes more work to get there. But it certainly applies as we look at the cybersecurity field as well. And one of the questions I had come in here was, do I mainly work with companies and clients that are struggling to maintain a good cybersecurity posture? I would say yes and no, or my consulting answer, and you'll see I'm smiling because I always caveat it with that, is it depends. I actually work with companies all across the landscape of cybersecurity maturity, if you will. Yes, a lot of the client work that I do is with companies that are looking to build or mature their programs. But conversely, I work with programs, and I'm thinking of one in particular, and I know it's one that every single one of you have used, throughout your life, or your parents have used it to get things for you in that way. And I'm purposely not saying the name of the client for a variety of reasons. They are, quite frankly, one of the most mature clients that I work with, and they still ask us to come in to help, to weigh in on things that they're doing and provide a perspective for them as well. And just to give you a sense of kind of the range there, when we do we'll call it maturity analysis with clients, again, thousands of data points that we're looking at, but we rate on overall maturity on a scale of 1 to 5. Probably familiar with, if you're not, with it, it's called a CMMI model. It's a capability maturity model to really assess, 1 being you have pieces of a program, 5 being fully optimized. This company is at a 4.7. Most of the clients I work with are somewhere between the 1 to upper 3 range, and very few are at the upper end of that. But I still have quite a lot of clients that work up there as well. So it is a wide gambit. each one of them has different problems, and each one of the industries that I've worked in has a little bit of a different flavor to it as well. And just to touch on that point, because we got a similar question at the end of the last session, working across the industries, is there a favorite one, or is there a perspective I could share? And this is where I would say, I typically kind of use the 80-20 rule type of thing, where with the exception of, I say it's 90-10 from a security perspective, where 90% of what you do from a cybersecurity perspective, what you do is the same. The 10% industry flavor that you had, and see if I can get this in camera, is where the context comes in, what you're going to apply, how you're going to apply it. But conceptually, you still need to do security monitoring, you still need to do vulnerability scanning, you still need a secure network architecture, you need a process by which you're going to capture, analyze, and make decisions about risks. That all stays the same, again, conceptually, but the application is where the industry matters, and even what they care about as an organization, and the resultant level of, call it required security posture that they need as well for that. So hopefully that answered your question. It was kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that was helpful. So, back to the the story as we go through this. I was going through classes. I knew I had an internship requirement. One of the side things that I actually picked up, from, I'll say, towards the end of my sophomore year through almost the end of my junior year, was a small part-time job as a local IT intern. You probably have seen their sign over on between Atherton between College and Beaver, KCF Technologies. So I was their IT intern at the time. And when I was there, we were in a much, much smaller office. We didn't have the snazzy office space that they do now, but really just dug in, helped them with some general IT support, some bookkeeping and record keeping, and some other odds and ends things as well. But it was a job that was easy to work at the same time as going to classes and being a cheerleader at the same time. But it was a great experience to actually leverage some of the skills that I was learning and help apply those to that company as well. So as I said, I kept that job until roughly May of my junior year. As Bill mentioned earlier on, I actually got an internship with PwC. I don't remember the specifics of how we got internships then. I think it was through career services or the internship office. I know a lot has changed in that, but suffice it to say, did some initial interviews, landed the internship position, and then that summer between my junior and senior year, I went and did the internship. So it was roughly, I think, 2 to 3 months. I worked in the Philadelphia area, which was new for me because, as I said, I grew up in this area in central PA. So it was a little bit different. Was interesting, having to, travel to work, but actually getting, I'll call it, real exposure to clients. We worked on real client engagements, of course, with guardrails around it, of course, so we didn't mess up their business. But we tested out what we were, actually, learning both on the job and the skills that we had brought before. And, I'm going to combine a little bit of what we did at the time and both at the internship and then throughout that internship and when I started full time with them. But, as was mentioned before, the actual, and I see a couple questions coming in, which I love, by the way, that internship, PwC, and like many other companies at the time, and I think they still do today, treated it like an extended job interview. It was, hey, here's the kind of work. Is this something you want to get into? Are you a good fit culturally to the organization, meaning just how we work with clients? And is this something you want to do afterwards? It kind of allowed us both myself as well as PwC to really assess that while getting your hands dirty, if you will, on real client work. So at the end of that, was a success. I got offered a full-time job, and actually took that job, which I started after graduating in roughly the July period as well. And I wanted to pause there for a minute because I had a question that was related come in around, do these internships make you feel prepared for the real world cybersecurity, or is there still a knowledge or experience gap? So I want to answer that question in two parts. Certainly, as you're going through college, they will teach you quite a lot of the fundamentals and quite a lot of the, we'll call it practical components of cyber. That application part of how you apply those skills, and the whole reasoning for having an internship is to get you that exposure of taking what you learn in school and applying it as well. So there's certainly, I would say, as I mentioned in kind of my opening, there's always more things to learn and more experience to gather, particularly in a consulting fashion. There's a lot to learn in that regard. So it can be both a knowledge gap and a skills gap of seeing how organizations actually work, and how they've set things up and how they've grown over time. Where you can see, and we'll say, here's a perfect network architecture, from how it works, and the security tools are in there to, I think the easiest way to say it is the other mess that are some of the big companies and clients that we work with, because they've grown over time. Business has a way in there where things that sound great from an ivory tower perspective just aren't practical in the business. And that's where I tie it back to the risk management decision. Was that done for a particular reason? Or was it just done because it was the most expedient way possible? So actually going through and articulating that, going through and understanding that takes time to build the expertise and build the actual skills to dissect why and how organizations got somewhere, as well as where do they go from here? What's the rationale? What are the things that they need to do to really improve their program going forward? So hopefully that answered your question. There's always, it's kind of a give and take between what you learn in school and what's expected in the real world. But I can tell you flat out, what I learned in IST was immensely valuable to me going forward. And quite frankly, IST at the time was and still is today, from my personal opinion and what I see out in the world, is still a leader in this space in terms of what you're learning and what you're taught and how applicable it is to the real world. So it's great. And that being that blend of tech and business has been great, and having more majors available, like SRA, like cyber, like data science, and I think there's some others potentially in the works in the future, certainly helps as well. So one other quick question, and it was a good one as well. Has the pandemic changed the way you think about cyber? Has the move to online working and living exposed previously unknown gaps in security? The short answer is yes, absolutely. It has changed it a little bit. Now, the massive change to all remote working, for the most part, quite a lot of the organizations that I do work with, and that ranges the gamut. I'm answering just the next question as we go through this. It ranges public, private, and private companies. I kind of work across the industry gamut there on a regular basis, but it is specifically, when we get into get into cyber and the remote working piece of it, it actually went into quite a bit of detail. How do we take people that were normally either working on still desktops at the office, or hey, didn't need VPN access before, being able to remote in and access critical systems? How did you provide that in a rapid fashion? And how did you do that securely? What changes did you need to make to restrict access to sensitive data? How did you restrict that when you think about what they're doing? Are there additional rules that needed to be applied to say, hey, we don't want Joe or Jill signing in at 3 a.m. from a from a random location? How do you actually detect for that, and what do you do when that happens? Is that something we want to prevent, or something we want to respond? We want to respond to when it happens as well. So yes, it absolutely has both changed some of the way we work. I would say one of the good side effects is, rather than going in, we'll call it business casual clothes every day. A lot of my clients switch to casual clothes like this. So it is interesting working, I'll say from my standing desk at home every day, whereas I used to travel 60 to 70% of my time before that, to working in a t-shirt every day. And that's the way my clients work too, and just not really impacting my job, because most of it's been, because I live here in Happy Valley and have very few clients right here, my team has been largely remote as well. So there are a couple other questions that came in. I want to do a little bit more, and then I want to come back to answering some of these questions as well. And I will certainly make time as we get later on to answer these, but I wanted to just continue just a little bit here, as we go through and get into some of the specifics as well. So, I mentioned that, I was an intern at PwC, accepted a full-time offer, and then went, started there in, I think, the July timeframe. I call it starting, but really, doing a lot of cramming and we'll call it an additional learning, because they sent us to, I can't remember the name of the town in Georgia, for 5 weeks of training, 40 hours a week of, we'll call it deep ingrained training, how PwC works, kind of we'll call it the big picture component stuff, how consulting works, building better consulting skills, as well as deep into the technology areas as well. So as I said, we spent 5 weeks down there doing quite a bit of that training. And then we were back in the office and off to the races. So I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, what did he do while he was at PwC? I actually did what you would call red teaming. A lot of that penetration testing, threat intel gathering, social engineering, wireless penetration testing, and configuration reviews, architecture reviews, all sorts of fun, deep technology oriented types of analyses. And quite frankly, doing pen testing was really, really fun at the time. Also equally scary when we had a very high success rate from both a pen testing standpoint, and personally I had a really high success rate from a social engineering standpoint. And I'll touch on that latter one in a minute. But from a pen testing standpoint and even application security testing standpoint, we used a lot of the same tools and that a lot of the attackers do today. And I know there's the red cell. They're at Penn State. Much of what they're doing, we did at PwC, and I know that they still continue to do that. We do there's a modified way that we go about it at Gartner, but it's getting in and essentially trying to break into companies, and they pay you for it. So it was a lot of fun, but as I said, equally scary because of the ease with which we were able to do it at times. And as we just to kind of finish up the PwC element, that social engineering component, basically, it's trying to convince somebody that you're an employee from that company, that they should trust you, and that you need their credentials to log into something and fix something for them. Sounds really silly when I just frame it up like that, but we were really good at building out the talk tracks and building the relationships with these folks that we literally just dialed up and getting credentials. I think I was over an 85% success rate. So I don't know if that's a good thing, meaning that I was just really good at it because I was good at lying to people and instilling confidence that I was who I said I was, or if it's also equally disturbing that we were so successful at it. And the point being that regardless of how much technical control you had and how much security, like say we weren't able to get in from just a call it completely black box outside in perspective, we were usually able to get in, if we couldn't that way, through social engineering some credentials out of people, and then we would get in. But the point being that the people side of the business, or people side of the security element, is just as equally, if not more important going forward. So I built quite a lot of skills there, and I see just one more question coming in here, and I will touch on those in here just a minute. But it was a really great experience. Built up a massive amount of technology underpinning, of really taking what I learned in IST and putting it into practice, and then being able to turn around and articulate that back to our clients. So for any of you out there that are thinking you're not going to have to write a lot if you go into the cyber field, I beg to differ. I at times now consider myself more of a PowerPoint jockey, because we write all of our reports and such in PowerPoint. But it's really hard at the same time to convey a complex topic in a picture, or to put all of that together. So writing is a big part of it. The way that you communicate is a massive part of it. And PwC was great at trying to build those skills at the same time as we were trying to build our technical skills as well. So I'll pause here for a minute and answer a couple of questions. So, one of them said, I discussed the role of working on my soft skills like networking. What would you suggest to help building those sorts of soft skills at PSU? So the part of my answer is a little difficult given it's a little difficult right now given the pandemic. Hopefully we're getting out of that finally. But attending the networking events that you have there, taking the opportunity to connect with alumni where possible. If there's mentoring things that you can get in on, that's great, because a lot of them, like myself in this case, and I forgot to mention before, I'm actually the president of the IST Alumni Society board as well. So part of why I think why I get asked to help, because I'm already engaged with the university in that regard. But there are plenty of alumni out there that are willing to have a chat, to talk about this, even creating those connections, both through that process to the other ones that PSU offers, and just the other things. It's really helpful. And I think the only way to really get better at it is to do it more, to practice it when it's possible. It is a little bit of a challenge, as I will fully admit today, but that will hopefully be getting better very, very soon. So one of the other questions we had was, do you ever find that there are times with no issues within an organization similar to peacetime, or do you find yourself constantly busy? I would say from a security perspective, your job is never done. If you ever stop, you're immediately behind. That's not to say that I'm always looking for work, but there's more work to be done. In the world of cyber, quite frankly, it's a chicken and egg game. Cyber companies or technology companies or just organizations in general will create new defenses or more effective ways, and at the same time, the attackers are doing the same thing, figuring out new and innovative ways to break stuff, or to break in there as well, or to do things that they're not supposed to within organizations. So there are certainly ebbs and flows within organizations of the kind of work that they're doing, but they're never done. In terms of the analogy around being similar to peacetime, I haven't met a client yet, and this is coming from a consulting standpoint, so take it with a grain of salt. They come to me for help. It's just the general premise of it. But everybody's working on something all the time and constantly adding new things. And we do roadmaps with clients where we're saying, hey, here's the things you need to focus on for the next 3 years, and we're going to help them fix that next year too, and readjust that roadmap. So it's just a constant churn. And part of that too is the change in business for how things go through, and how they work, and the ever increasing speed with which new applications are developed, the way applications are developed, the prevalence of cloud in environments today, or people moving to the cloud. things are changing, and honestly, the things like iPhone events, where they massively change the way users work or interact, or just the openness of environments. You're never done. So there are things that accelerate it, then there are things where it'll slow down a little bit, but you're never done. And the last question really quickly was around how many different operating systems are used for cybersecurity work. All of them, I think, is the answer to that question. Um, just meaning that every client's a little different. We work with clients that are pure Mac shops, things that are pure Windows, some that run on Linux, variety of different flavors. A lot of that varies. There's still mainframe out there today, if any of you are familiar with that, which frankly enough, if you're looking for a nice niche, there's a lot of folks where people they're struggling to find folks that can still program in what is it, COBOL, or work with AS400s out there. So there's a little homework assignment if you learn some skills there, which are not as easy by any means as some of the newer coding languages out there. That's a pretty hot market. Don't take that as career advice, just an observation of the market by any means, but it is an interesting one for sure. So short answer to your question is all of them are there. If it was more specifically around when you're doing pen testing, honestly, I haven't done pen testing in a while, so I know the tools have changed quite a bit, but there are a lot of times, and what we did at the time and what I hear from some of my friends that are still doing it, there are some Linux distributions that are out there that are kind of preloaded with some of the security tools that many of them use quite often as a part of it. So it really just depends on what the question, how that question was, directed. But yeah, it's quite a lot of them. So, as I mentioned, I worked for PwC for quite a number of years and built up quite a lot of skills on the red team side of the house, if you will. The interesting part about that, and PwC was really a great company to start at for me, but I wanted to continue to build my skill set and actually turn around and apply that red team skills that I had on the blue team side, meaning from a defense standpoint. So I made the decision to start a new job at Booz Allen. The Booz Allen offered to let us, and they operate a little bit differently from a consulting fashion. Primarily, they were defense or federal contracting at the time, as well as state and local. Not so much commercial, but that's a different story on why there. But it afforded me the opportunity to do two different things there. One, help out the U.S. Navy, Bureau of Medicine from an application testing standpoint, both feature and functionality testing, as well as security testing. But more importantly, gave me the opportunity to, one, help build and then ultimately run the Security Operations Center for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Again, as an employee of Booz Allen. But it was really interesting because now I get to took all of those skills, the deep technology skills that I built and the pen testing skills, and turn around and go, okay, that chicken and egg game I mentioned. Now I get to say, how do I prevent people from doing that? What change do I need to drive in the organization? And how do I protect DEA, which lots of fun details, lots of fun stories that I can't share with any of you, unfortunately. But it was really interesting and eye-opening. But the skill set there, was really great. In terms of just broadening both how I broke things and creating, call it protections against those, but also learning about the defense measures. So learning around security incident and event monitoring tools, SIEM as they're colloquially called, or the acronym is. Those are things like Splunk, IBM QRadar, and a whole host of other ones that are out there, but they're, for all intents and purposes, they're security monitoring. They grab a huge amount of data, and security is a big data problem anymore from a monitoring standpoint. It's where the data science tie-in comes in, where you're collecting all of this information, correlating it, and we were building rule sets for detections. Hey, what's the thing we care about? Okay, well, how would I detect that? What are the pieces of the log that I'm looking for? And at the time I was doing that, these were still fairly new technologies that required a lot of call it intelligence-led activities, meaning we had to actually apply, what we were looking for and think about how we were doing it. So that's where that analysis component comes in, as well as, well, who was trying to come after the DEA, and how would they do it? What are they going after? Where do the security controls tie in? And do we have things appropriately in place? So that's certainly what, building out that seam and then running the team of analysts that we had in the SOC was great, but also building out and engineering particular security capabilities. So, doing vulnerability scanning, helping them to stand up that program and the process by which you actually conduct that. What do you do with the results when they come out? A lot of times working with my with my clients, they'll have all the best technology in the world. They buy the greatest security tools that are out there, but the problem is they have the tool, they don't have the program to run it. They keep it up to date, to keep it, they really truly understand how it's used in the environment, why it's used, and as I said with the vulnerability example, more importantly, what do you do with the results? How do you make sure vulnerabilities get addressed in a timely fashion? And if not, why? And that's where that risk management portion comes back into play. And I see I have a couple questions up here, and I'll touch on them in just a second, of really understanding and documenting what a risk is and what you should do about it. And there are still, it's not as prevalent today as it used to be a few years ago. A number of CISOs, the chief information security officers at organizations that I speak to, that think they own all of cyber risk, and trying to help them understand that, well, that's not actually the case. The business actually owns the risk. Your job is to inform them of the magnitude and call it potential or probability of that risk and what should be done about it, so that they can make an appropriate decision. And the fun part, called a side fun part of my job, is when they complain to me that, well, the business didn't make the right decision, I get to turn it around on them and say, well, you didn't do that. You didn't inform them the right way then. So it's a little bit of give and take, if you will. But some of that job, and the job of a CISO, is persuasion to some degree, meaning that they need to articulate it in business terms. So the easy example here, and I'll touch on this when we the couple of the questions here. When I was doing penetration testing and application security testing, used a whole variety of tools like Burp Suite. Kali Linux was one of the platforms. It was actually, that's the new name for it. I forget what it was when I did it. But yeah, basically the same platform. So you're running, Ethereal or Wireshark on top of it to do some sniffing, pass the hash at the time, which again, I forget what it's called now, was actually kind of discovered when I was doing pen testing. And I'll say that made my job supremely easy, because all we needed was one set of credentials and we could masquerade in their environment. But when we're talking about the application security example here, I use things like Burp Suite, Web Inspect, and a whole host of other tools as well, including just manual testing activities there as well. So we found what I'll call is simple vulnerabilities with massive impacts. So things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, where on their face you're like, oh, okay, great, you can make the database spit some information back out. It's like, no, I can actually make the database tell me everything that it's doing, all the data it has, just through a simple, hey, enter your name here kind of field. And the scary part is I still see that today. I still work with clients where they have that issue today, and there's an easy fix for it from a parameterized query standpoint. But again, cross-site scripting, again, great. You can make a pop-up happen. no, I can actually take over your machine with that kind of thing. So helping to articulate that and helping to show clients is immensely valuable as well. So hopefully I answered the two questions there as well. The one on Kali Linux, yes, just the previous iteration of it, and we used to actually add additional tools on our laptops. And at the time, when I was at PwC, they were dual boot laptops. We had our PwC image, but then we could also dual boot into our call it pen testing image, if you will, as well. And I touched on the other types of programs we've used. It's been a whole host of them, over my career. Here at Gartner, we don't really do a lot of hands-on tool running, if you will. I do a lot more strategy work than anything else. But I think the requester here, in terms of the last question that I have popping up, and really it's how have your relationships with companies changed over your career? Have they become more receptive security risk assessments, or is there pushback? I'll answer that in the context of my job here at Gartner. So long story short on this, because I realize we're coming up on time, and I want to make sure I give everyone time to ask additional questions. I worked at Booz Allen for quite a number of years. The work was really, really interesting. But the challenging part of that was, when I moved or switched jobs from PwC to Booz, it required a move as well, because Booz operated at the time primarily in the DC metro, at least where I was hired into. And if you remember, I worked out of the Philadelphia office before. Well, my wife and I had just bought a house a couple of years prior to that, or a year or two prior to that, and then the housing market crashed. So I got to do, when I worked at Booz, what I call the Accenture model: 5 days a week in the DC metro, and then travel home on weekends. So that wears on you after a while, especially when my family started growing. My first daughter was born. So I then decided to make an additional change, and then came over to Gartner. Started out as a senior consultant. Again, a little bit of a shift, but it let me take both the deep technical skills on both the red team and blue team side and actually elevate them up a little bit to a strategic consulting standpoint, where we were brought in to do, and this is to answer the question, quite a lot of security risk assessments, or more security maturity assessments, if you will, as well as helping them from an architecture and design standpoint as well. So a lot of the clients that I worked with throughout my career here, things are falling off my desk. Yes, there are some that are resistant to it, but there's also been some regulation, particularly in the financial services industry, as well as a few others, that are actually mandating it now. The really interesting part over the past few years is, yes, organizations are becoming much, much more receptive to the importance of security. Again, because of the prevalence of some of the breaches, and from that standpoint, the only adage I'm going to bring on today, or use for that topic today, because I use it all the time with clients, is it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached, it's a matter of when you're going to be breached and how bad it is in your environment, because they will get in at some point. But are you going to detect them, and are you going to have a good response and recovery strategy for when they do? Because it literally, like I said, it's just a matter of time. And if any of the APTs out there, the advanced persistent threats, or nation states, target you as an organization, get a good response and recovery plan in place, because they are going to get in. And that applies across the industry life cycle, or the industry spectrum there as well. So the last point on that one, they have become much more receptive, and it's actually a change in the executive stance on it as well, meaning that when I interact with boards of directors, they actually ask a lot more questions about security than they used to. It used to just be, oh, hey, are we doing good on security? Yep. Okay, thanks. We're done. To now it's like, okay, well, what about this risk? Hey, I saw this in the Wall Street Journal this morning. How are we against that? Or most recently with SolarWinds, are we using SolarWinds? Were we breached? How bad was it? Where are we going? How do we make sure they don't get any further in our environment, to just a whole host of other things that they ask about, and some of them are in the context of their business. Other ones are just more broad security terms. And I do want to say, as Bill had mentioned in the chat, thank you all for these great questions. As you can tell, I do like talking about cyber quite a bit. But just the final point on that question is it's really there's less pushback anymore on the need to do this. It's that what we get pushback on is the importance of it versus the overall things they need to get done. And there it's how do you build the broader perspective of all the things you need to do to keep up from a security standpoint into the context of the business, and how do you actually improve. We have for any of you that don't know, the name Gartner. Gartner is an IT research company at heart. We have a whole host of analysts that do a lot of research across the just range of IT and other stuff and security that is, just a wealth of information. But we also do consulting on that as well. But it's just really interesting, and allows us to provide that broad perspective around security and the whole host of security. And we have a framework that's derived from some of that we leverage at clients, in addition to some of the industry standards that are out there, like the NIST cybersecurity framework. But I always make the joke when you talk about the interdependencies between different components of security. If I were to actually draw those connections on the framework we use, you end up with a black slide, because it's so interdependent on things, and getting that mapped out or doing it well takes some expertise to get right. And not all of the clients that we work with have that. And there's certainly, and I think it's probably a leading question from the first one we had, there is still a skills gap from a security perspective. We are constantly, myself included, looking for really skilled cyber people, security and risk analysis folks, just a whole host of folks that are good at this, want to get better, because there's a need. I mean, as I said, security is not going away. If anything, it's getting harder, it's getting more complex, and need to go there. And apologies, I see that I went over on time from the class. I was thinking 12:15 for some reason.
Well, hey, Luke, thank you very much for your time.
No problem at all. Thank you all, and thank you for the great questions. Very, very, very helpful, and certainly I think if my information was shared, as I think it was, please feel free.
And thanks again, and thanks for the great questions from the students.
Thank you.